Welcome back to the Tik-A Tee Method. My name is Ron Castonguay, longtime educator, composer, author, conductor, clinician, and performer. I'm so glad you're joining us here for week 5 as we dive into the dotted half note. Now, dotted notes can often pose problems for students as it can be confusing as to what exactly a dot does when it's placed after the note head. What does it do to the value of that note? Well, in this video, we are going to demystify the dot. And we're going to start with dotted half notes. It's the only new concept in this chapter, so let's go tackle it right now. All right, so here we are in week 5, and you'll notice at the top of the page, we've got our dotted half note right there. The first thing I want to talk about, however, is the verbiage. So we know that in the Tik-A Tee method, anything that has a value of a quarter note or longer in any time signature is going to use the word or syllable ta to represent that note, and you would just hold it for the appropriate value. In this case, a dotted half note gets 3 beats, and we're going to learn why right now. Before we get into the math of what a dot does to the value of a note, let's just check out what it looks like in the staff. We have our note head, which in this case is an open note head, not filled in like a quarter note or an eighth note. We have our stem right here, which can go up or down. And we have the addition of the dot, which is placed to the upper right-hand side of a note head. And this dot is what affects the value of that note. Let's look at the diagram in the center of the page. Now we're going to get into the math of what a dot does to the value of a note when it's placed after that note head. We have the definition right here, but I'm going to paraphrase. Simply put, when a dot's placed after a note head, it takes half of the original value of that note and adds it to itself. Now, if that's still confusing, let's look at this music notation in the center of this box. We have our half note here, which we know gets 2 beats. If we take half of 2 beats, we get 1 beat. Now we add those two things together, we get 3 beats. So again, that dot took half the value of the half note, which was 1, and added it to itself, which was 2, to get 3 beats. This is the basic math behind the dotted half note. This is how dots work for all notes. So no matter what note has a dot after it, it will take half of the original value and add it to itself. Now, the reason why I started with dotted half notes in my book is because this particular dotted note is the easiest mathematical concept to grasp and to begin to build that understanding of what a dot does to the value of a note. In other words, 2 plus 1 equals 3 is a very basic mathematical concept. Later in the book, however, when we introduce dotted quarter notes and we introduce dotted eighth notes and so forth and so on, they could create potential syncopation, for example, which we learned about in last week's video. With the dotted half note, it does not create syncopation, and the math behind it is pretty simple. So this is a great way for students to begin to understand how a dot affects the value of a note. If we look towards the bottom of the page here, we can see this little note about dotted half rests. So that poses the question, can dots affect rests as well? Yes, they can, but they're not introduced yet. Again, we just start with the dotted half note in this week in this chapter, but they will be coming soon, so stay tuned for dotted rests. And at the very bottom of the page, you'll see my little take note diagram. This is intended to clarify the 2 different types of dots that can affect notes. Now, the one we just learned about, this one right here that I just circled, that's the dot that's placed to the right of the note head, and that affects the value of a note. However, this one right here that I'm putting a box around, I'll point to that dot above that note head, that's an articulation. So it does not per se affect the value of the note, it affects the articulation of that note. And in this case, a dot is a staccato. A lot of people think that staccato means short, when actually the proper definition of staccato is separated. So this bottom box is just intended to clarify and eliminate any confusion between those 2 different types of dots, the one placed after a note head and the one placed above a note head. And now that we've gone through this entire page and hopefully demystified the dot, it is now time to go check out the exercises. Here we are at the first page of week 5's exercises, and we are going to start today with exercise 5A. As I suggested in last week's video, whenever we start a new exercise, this is a great opportunity for you to hit pause on the video and study an exercise for 10, 20, 30 seconds using the techniques that we've previously discussed, so you can set yourself up for success when you take that first attempt at sight reading these rhythms. What I found to be very helpful for students is when I write the number of beats above or below each measure. This seems to help students better compartmentalize or subdivide those measures, while at the same time connecting the verbiage of the Tik-A Tee method to the rhythms. So we're going to go ahead and do that for exercise 5A right now. So starting right with measure 1, we've got a half note that comes in on the downbeat of 1, takes up the first 2 beats of the measure. We've got another half note that comes in on beat 3, takes up beats 3 and 4. Going to the second measure, we've got our first instance of our new concept, the dotted half note, which now we know takes up 3 beats. So above that dotted half note, I will write 1, 2, 3 until we get to this quarter note that comes in on beat 4. Moving on to measure 3, ta, ta, rest on beat 3, paired grouping of 8th notes on beat 4, T, T. Then in measure 4, we've got another dotted half note, which we know takes up 3 beats until we get to this quarter rest on beat 4. Now, when we have something like this in our music, I tell students above this quarter rest to write -4. So if I have a dotted half note followed by a quarter rest in a 4/4 measure, I want to assure that my students are going to hold that dotted half note out its full value. It would sound like this, conducted. Ta. So they're holding that note out its full value. So that's what the -4 means. Then I've got this great reminder to look ahead in the music during that cutoff, during that rest, especially when you're switching lines. Going to measure 5, I've got a quarter note on beat 1. Now here on beat 2, I've got a dotted half note. That's going to take up the last 3 beats of the measure. So it's coming in on beat 2, but it still gets 3 full beats. Going on to measure 6, I've got a dotted half note on beat 1, 1, 2, 3, until this quarter note on beat 4. And you'll notice that measure 2 and measure 6 are identical. Moving on to measure 7, I've got T, T. And then a little glimpse of last week's video. We've got an 8th rest followed by an 8th note. What does that create? A little bit of 8th note syncopation. So where does the beat fall here? Well, beat 2 falls on this 8th rest, thereby creating an upbeat right here on the and of 2. This half note comes in on beat 3, takes up 2 beats, beats 3 and 4. And then the last measure, we have a dotted half note, 1, 2, 3 with a quarter rest on beat 4. And you'll see I have this right here that says hold all the way to beat 4. The way I tell my students to write that in their music, -4, so that we get ta. It's very important to teach students to hold notes full value right from the beginning when they're reading rhythms and music notation. So hopefully this helped you better subdivide or compartmentalize these measures. Hopefully it helped you better connect the Tik-A Tee verbiage to the rhythms, because now it is time to go perform this exercise together. All right, first you're going to hear the metronome. We're going to be at 70 beats per minute, or the quarter note equals 70. I'm using tonal energy again. I'm using the same sound and subdivision that I used from last week's video. Next, you'll hear the pitch. I'm going to be singing this on a G3. You're welcome to join me on that pitch or any octave of the G. You can even sing a totally different note if you want to. So here we go. Here's your metronome. And here comes your pitch. We want to solidify the pitch and that tempo. Here comes the count off. 1, 2, 3, 4, ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, 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 ti, 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 ta, ta. Okay, now you probably heard me hold out those dotted half notes at the end of the first line and at the end of the second line, all the way till that cutoff on that quarter rest on beat 4. I hope you did the same thing. So now we need to know, did we do it right? Did we make any mistakes? We go and check the MP3 answer to this exercise to see if we did it right. So let's go do that right now. So here we are at the MP3s. I've changed my screen a little bit from previous videos just so you can see the exercise, as well as my screenshot of my computer just a little bit better. So I'm going to press play on week 5, exercise A right here, and you have one of 3 options. You can just follow along, checking for your accuracy along the way. You can sing along, or you can break out your instrument and play along. So here is exercise 5A. One, two, three, 4. Ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, ta, ta. Ti, ti, ta, ta. Okay, so as you either sang along, followed along, played your instrument along, you know if you feel pretty confident about this exercise. Remember, the last important component of this is to be able to play these exercises on your instrument, especially if it's not the voice. So you should do that now if you haven't done so already. One, two, three, 4. And now we're ready to try another exercise from week 5. I'm going to change it up just a little bit. Instead of going to the next one, which would be 5B, I'm going to go to 5C. That being said, there are many more exercises in each week or each chapter of my book. So if you want more exercises, more rhythm practice, please do go check out the book. Okay, what we're going to do for exercise 5C is the same thing we did for 5A. I'm going to write in all the beats for the measures, again with the intention to help you better compartmentalize and subdivide the measures, as well as connect the verbiage for the Tik-A Tee method to the rhythms. Okay, so let's get started. As we look at measure 1, we see that the new concept for the week appears right away. We have the dotted half note, which we know gets 3 beats. So beneath that, I'm going to write 1, 2, 3, followed by beat 4 for this quarter rest. And we recognize this measure from exercise 5A, right? The end of the first line, the end of the second line. We want to make sure we're holding that dotted half note full value, so we cut off or release on beat 4. And we can see from this pro tip up here, and that I'm stressing this a lot in this week or this chapter, to hold all notes full value. So that first measure, ta, release on beat 4, okay? The next measure, measure 2, we've got 2 beats of silence with this half rest. So if you look at beat 4 from the previous measure plus these 2, we're actually going to have 3 beats consecutive silence. Beat 3 will be a half note, which takes up 2 beats. Measure 3, we bring back the groupings of 16th notes. Tik-A, 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 ta to that half note. Then we have a single grouping of 16th notes. Tik-A, tik-A, ta. Now we've got a dotted half note, which takes up beats 2, 3, and 4. And while we're holding that note, we do want to make sure that we're looking ahead at the next line. We don't need to be staring at that note while we're singing it, when we could be looking ahead and seeing what's coming up next, which is ti, 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 ta, ta. Next measure, ta, ta, another dotted half note that enters on beat 2. So beats 2, 3, and 4 will have that dotted half note. Okay? Next measure, ta, ta. Now we've got some syncopation here. This eighth rest is beat 3, and this eighth rest is beat 4, thereby creating some eighth note syncopation on the end of 3, and the end of 4 will have 2 upbeats. Last measure, ta, and then this dotted half note, ta, for 3 beats. And we want to hold this full value. And the way that I tell my students to do this is just imagine that there's a bar after that final bar line, and you want to cut off on the first beat of that. That's going to ensure that you hold that note the full value. Ta, ta. And you're releasing on this invisible beat 1 of an end bar line. So hopefully talking through this and adding all of the beats for each measure helps you solidify some of these rhythms. And hopefully now you are ready to perform this with me. So let's go do it. All right, you're going to hear the metronome, then the pitch, then the count off. Here we go. And you want to solidify that tempo and that pitch before we do the count off. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, ta. Ta, ticka, 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 ta. Ticka, ticka, ta. Tee, 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 ta, 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 tee, tee, ta, ta. And you heard me hold that last note all the way to that invisible beat 1 of that next measure that's not there. That's exactly how long you should hold that note out for. And you'll notice, I'm definitely not a vocalist, but the second thing you'll notice is that I just breathed wherever I needed to breathe while still maintaining the integrity of the rhythm and keeping it accurate with the metronome. So as long as you're doing that, you can breathe wherever you need to in these exercises. All right, now that we've done it, we need to go check it for accuracy against the MP3 answer for exercise 5C. Let's go check right now. All right, so here we are with the MP3 for exercise 5C. Again, these MP3s are intended to be quote-unquote answers to all of these exercises, so you know exactly what these rhythms should sound like. You have one of 3 options before I press play. You can just follow along, checking for your accuracy. You can sing along, or you can break out that instrument and play along. So here we go, the MP3 for exercise 5C. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ta, ta, ticka, 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 ta, ticka, ticka, ta, tee, 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 ta, 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 tee, tee, ta, ta. And there you have it, exercise 5C and its accompanying MP3 quote-unquote answer. So if you're feeling pretty confident about this exercise and you have not yet performed it on your instrument, now is the time. One, 2, 3, 4. And that does it for week 5. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had some fun along the way, and I hope you learned a little bit about dotted half notes and what that dot placed to the right-hand side of a note head does to its value. It's important as we get into dotted quarter notes and eventually dotted eighth notes in the not too distant future. Please check out my book, Rhythmic Sight-Reading, The Tik-A Tee Method. It's available at my website, roncastonguay.com, as well as Amazon and J.W. Pepper. And while we're at it, be sure to check out my store on Amazon, Ron Castonguay Music, where I have 8 books for sale there. One of them is actually a really fun and educational music theory word search. And in the meantime, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell so you get the latest video. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you in the next Tik-A Tee Tuesday.